Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about stateless versus stateful widgets. In Flutter, the way widgets work is that we have widgets that are stateless and widgets that are stateful. Now, what is the difference really? The difference is very simple. So if we look at a Flutter application, we have different widgets. For instance, we have a button widget and we could have a text widget. These are some of the stateless widgets. The reason why they are stateless widgets as they are is because they don't have any internal state. What that means is that when we create a button on the screen or a text widget on the screen, they really don't have a state, which means they don't need to be redrawn on the screen when we are just putting them on the screen. Which means if you put a button on the screen, just a simple button, and you hot reload or run the application, each time you're running this application, this state doesn't change because there is no internal state for this button, because there's no need to redraw them when something happens. Okay? This is what a stateless widget really is. An example of a stateful widget would be, for instance, which we haven't really talked about, text field. A text field allows us to enter some text. The idea when we enter some text is that we need to save a state. Another example would be a slider. So a slider allows us to slide left or right. And as we slide the sliders, the idea is that we are changing the state of the slider, right? So the values are changing, and most often we want to be able to save those states. So a stateful widget saves internal state, which means there is a process of redrawing those widgets. The way a stateful widget works is very simple. Take example of a slider, for instance. So a slider, when we slide left or right on slider touch, that would be the state or the event. What happens is internally there is this set state method or function that it's called. So what this one does, internally what happens, it allows to change the values of the slider. Let's say if you're at 0, if you go to right, it goes to 1 or 10 or 15 and so forth. So it's storing this state, this current state as we move left or right of a slider. It's storing those state into a state object. So every stateful widget has this object called the state object, which all it does is to store state objects. So when that happens, the state object returns the current state that has been saved. Let's say the value is 1 back to the set state, which then will go ahead and redraw our user interface. Okay, so a good example would be if we had an application that perhaps is when we tap on a button, we want to change the state of a text or a slider or the entire redrawing of the entire screen. This is what happens. So you go through the set state, which knows how to populate or save the state into an object called the state object. And the state object then will push or send those values that are needed to redraw the widgets on the screen. So this is what we're going to be looking at in the next video, so we can actually understand how all of this works. Once we get going, you will see that this is not as hard as it may seem. Perfect. So I'll see you in the next video.